It started with a summons no one expected. Not to Buckingham Palace, not to Windsor Castle, but to a private legal chamber where a sealed collection of documents tied to Prince Philip's personal affairs had remained untouched for years. What emerged from that meeting would leave even seasoned royal aides stunned, because at the center of the revelation was not a king, not a future monarch, but James, Earl of Wessex. And according to whispers spreading through royal circles, everything was about to change. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, Prince Philip's personal legacy had remained one of the monarchy's most carefully guarded mysteries. While the public focused on state ceremonies, royal duties, and the future of the crown, there were persistent whispers that the late Duke of Edinburgh had left behind far more than memories and titles. Reports suggest that certain private arrangements, TS drafted long before his passing, had been sealed away under strict legal protections. Very few people were believed to know their contents. Even fewer were thought to understand the true purpose behind them. That secrecy only deepened after Philip's death, when discussions surrounding his personal estate seemed to vanish behind closed doors. The silence was so complete that many assumed the matter had already been settled. But according to palace insiders, the story was never over. It was merely waiting for the right moment to resurface. That moment reportedly arrived when senior royal lawyers quietly convened a confidential meeting concerning portions of Prince Philip's private estate. There were no public announcements, no official statements, no indications that anything significant was taking place. Yet behind the scenes, a small group of trusted legal advisors allegedly gathered to examine documents that had remained sealed for years. Sources suggest the atmosphere surrounding the review was unlike anything normally associated with routine estate matters. Palace aides were instructed to maintain absolute discretion. Questions were discouraged. Conversations stopped abruptly whenever the topic arose. Those familiar with royal procedures reportedly described the level of secrecy as extraordinary, even by royal standards. What made the situation even more intriguing was the guest list. According to reports, James, Earl of Wessex, was unexpectedly summoned alongside his parents, Prince Edward and Sophie. For many observers, that detail alone raised immediate questions. James had largely remained outside the relentless spotlight that follows senior royals. He was not a central figure in succession debates. He was not frequently linked to major royal controversies. Yet somehow his presence had become essential to this meeting. Why? That question quickly spread through royal circles. And as speculation intensified, so did curiosity about what exactly those sealed documents contained. Insiders whisper that several family members may have been just as unaware as the public. Various interpretations of the situation suggest that even within royal ranks, expectations were uncertain. Some reportedly anticipated routine legal clarifications. Others expected administrative housekeeping connected to Prince Philip's long-standing affairs. Few, however, were prepared for what allegedly emerged from the review. As details slowly filtered through palace corridors, reactions reportedly ranged from surprise to disbelief. The contents of the documents appeared to challenge assumptions that had existed for years. Then came the moment that truly fueled the rumors. According to accounts circulating among those close to the discussions, James himself appeared deeply affected by what he heard. Sources claim he left the meeting visibly overwhelmed, struggling to process information that had remained hidden for so long. Exactly what was revealed remains the subject of intense speculation. But the reaction alone was enough to convince many that something significant had occurred. Something personal. Something Prince Philip had carefully planned years earlier, knowing that one day the truth would eventually surface. And that is where the mystery deepens. Because the growing conversation is no longer focused solely on legal documents or estate procedures. It is focused on intent. Why would Prince Philip make arrangements that remained concealed for years? Why would James, of all people, become such a central figure in this unfolding story? And perhaps most importantly, what did the late Duke hope to accomplish through decisions that continue to send ripples through the royal family long after his passing? Those questions lingered in the minds of everyone connected to the meeting, growing heavier with each passing day as more whispers began to emerge from behind palace walls. But the real shock wasn't that documents existed, it was what Prince Philip had allegedly chosen to do with them. For decades, people assumed they understood Prince Philip's legacy. They saw the public ceremonies, the military honors, and the royal titles. Yet behind those headlines stood a deeply private world, one built over a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and carefully guarded personal treasures. The deeper palace insiders looked into the mystery surrounding those newly reviewed documents. The clearer one thing became. Prince Philip had spent decades separating public duty from private legacy. To the outside world, he was the steadfast consort who stood beside a queen through generations of change. His life appeared inseparable from the institution he served. But according to those familiar with royal history, Philip understood better than most that not everything belonging to a royal automatically belonged to the crown. There was a distinction, one rarely discussed publicly but deeply important, behind palace walls. Some assets represented the monarchy itself. Others represented the personal journey of the man who had devoted nearly an entire lifetime to protecting it. Reports suggest that among Philip's private holdings were carefully preserved collections accumulated over decades. Letters exchanged with family members. Personal correspondence connected to pivotal moments in modern royal history. Gifts received during countless international visits. Inherited possessions carrying emotional significance that could never be measured by financial value alone. While public attention often focused on castles, titles, and state functions, Philip reportedly attached equal importance to the quieter pieces of history that reflected character, memory, and continuity. These were not merely objects. They were fragments of a life lived in service, reminders of relationships forged through duty, and symbols of traditions he believed should outlive him. That distinction between royal property and private property now sits at the heart of the growing intrigue. Many people naturally assume that everything connected to senior royals eventually flows into the institution. Yet insiders claim Philip was meticulous about understanding where personal ownership ended and where the crown's responsibilities began. Throughout his life, he reportedly maintained detailed records and clear instructions concerning possessions he regarded as personal rather than institutional. That attention to detail has become impossible to ignore as lawyers continue examining the contents of the sealed documents. Every page reviewed appears to reinforce the image of a man who planned carefully, anticipated future complications, and refused to leave important matters to chance. Those who worked around Philip frequently described him as someone who valued preparation above almost everything else. He was known for asking difficult questions, challenging assumptions, and thinking years ahead. According to various reports, that same mindset extended to his personal affairs. Long before concerns about succession, inheritance, or future family dynamics became public conversations, Philip allegedly began preparing confidential instructions intended to guide certain decisions after his passing. Some of those arrangements may have been drafted years, perhaps even decades, before they would ever be needed. At the time, few people could have guessed how significant those preparations would eventually become. And that is where the story begins to take an even more fascinating turn. Because insiders increasingly suggest that Philip's plans were never primarily about wealth. They were never simply about deciding who received what. Instead, there appears to have been a deeper objective running through many of his decisions. Friends and observers have long noted that Philip cared intensely about values, discipline, responsibility, resilience, and commitment to service. Reports now suggest he may have viewed inheritance not as a reward, but as a form of stewardship, a responsibility passed from one generation to another. A way of preserving principles rather than elevating status. As whispers surrounding the documents continued to spread, a growing number of royal watchers began asking the same question. If Prince Philip's plans were designed to protect values rather than prestige, then who did he believe embodied those values most strongly? Why had certain arrangements remained hidden for so long? And why did the answers appear to point towards someone few had initially considered? Those questions lingered over every discussion as the legal review moved forward, drawing attention toward a possibility that would soon become impossible to ignore. And as lawyers examined those plans more closely, they discovered a pattern that pointed toward one surprising heir. No one expected the room to fall silent. Yet according to accounts circulating among palace insiders, that is exactly what happened when one particular name surfaced during the legal review. view. It wasn't the king. It wasn't William. And it certainly wasn't one of the figures regularly dominating royal headlines. By the time lawyers had worked their way through the most sensitive portions of Prince Philip's sealed arrangements, speculation was already spreading through royal circles. Those following the story assumed that if a significant inheritance existed, it would naturally point toward one of the monarchy's most prominent figures. That assumption seemed almost unavoidable. After all, royal history is often viewed through the lens of rank, visibility, and future importance. Yet reports suggest that the documents revealed a very different picture. Instead of reinforcing public expectations, they appeared to challenge them entirely. And at the center of that challenge stood James, Earl of Wessex. According to whispers emerging from those familiar with the discussions, lawyers identified provisions that carried a direct connection to James. Exactly how extensive those provisions remains the subject of ongoing speculation, but insiders claim their significance was impossible to ignore. For some members of the family, the revelation allegedly came as a genuine surprise. Not because James lacked character or capability, but because his name had rarely been associated with major royal inheritance discussions. He had spent most of his life away from the constant scrutiny that follows senior members of the monarchy. While other royals found themselves at the center of headlines, controversies, and public debates, James largely remained in the background, living a quieter existence that attracted comparatively little attention. Ironically, that very fact may now lie at the heart of the mystery. Because as palace observers began examining the possibility that Prince Philip had placed extraordinary confidence in his grandson, a pattern slowly started to emerge. Throughout his life, Philip was never known for making decisions based solely on popularity or public perception. Those who followed his decades of service often described him as fiercely independent in his thinking. He respected commitment. He valued discipline. And perhaps above all else, he admired individuals who understood responsibility without constantly seeking recognition for it. That description has led many royal commentators to draw comparisons between Prince Philip and James himself. Reports suggest that Philip saw qualities in his grandson that reminded him of principles he considered essential to royal life. Not glamour, not attention, not influence, but steadiness. The ability to fulfill obligations without demanding applause. The willingness to place duty ahead of personal ambition. Those characteristics may not generate headlines, but according to various accounts, they were exactly the traits Philip respected most. As news of the legal review continued to leak beyond palace walls, public fascination only intensified. Media outlets began asking why a relatively low-profile royal appeared to have become such an important figure within Philip's private plans. Commentators debated whether the inheritance carried financial significance, symbolic meaning, or perhaps something even deeper. Some suggested it represented a personal endorsement. Others argued it reflected Philip's desire to preserve values he feared might become increasingly rare within modern royal life. Whatever the truth may be, the conversation was no longer simply about possessions or paperwork. It had become a debate about legacy itself. And that debate grew more intriguing with every passing day. Because the more people examined Prince Philip's reputation, the harder it became to dismiss the possibility that this decision had been carefully considered over many years. Reports increasingly suggested that the late Duke was sending a message through his choices, a message about character, responsibility, and trust. If that was indeed the case, then understanding the inheritance required understanding something far more personal than legal documents. It required understanding the relationship that may have inspired those decisions in the first place. Yet understanding why James may have been chosen requires looking back at a bond that formed long before the lawyers opened those documents. Long before inheritance rumors began swirling, there were small moments that rarely made newspaper headlines. Moments that seemed ordinary at the time but now appear far more significant when viewed through the lens of Philip's final wishes. As speculation surrounding the mysterious inheritance continued to grow, attention slowly shifted away from legal documents and towards something far more personal. The deeper people looked into Prince Philip's relationship with James, Earl of Wessex, the more they began uncovering a story that had unfolded quietly over many years. It was not a story built on public appearances or carefully crafted headlines. Instead, it consisted of subtle interactions, shared interests, and private moments that seemed insignificant at the time but now appear loaded with meaning. According to those familiar with royal family dynamics, Philip's connection with James was never dramatic or attention-grabbing. In many ways, that may have been exactly why it mattered. Reports suggest that Prince Philip took a particular interest in James from a young age. Not in a way that attracted public attention, but through the kind of quiet mentorship that often goes unnoticed outside family circles. While other royals frequently found themselves navigating intense public scrutiny, James was largely allowed to grow up away from the spotlight. That environment reportedly gave Philip opportunities to spend time with him in settings far removed from official engagements and ceremonial obligations. Those who observed these interactions often described them as natural and uncomplicated, grounded in shared interests rather than royal expectations. Much of that T-bond, insiders claim, revolved around traditions Philip deeply cherished. Throughout his life, the Duke of Edinburgh maintained a strong connection to the countryside, outdoor pursuits, and the history that shaped the royal family. These were not merely hobbies to him. They represented continuity. They represented responsibility. They represented an understanding that every generation inherits something larger than itself. According to various accounts, James showed genuine interest in these traditions, not because he was expected to, but because he appreciated them. That quiet enthusiasm reportedly resonated with Philip in a profound way. What makes this relationship especially intriguing is how closely it appears to align with the values Philip respected most. For decades, observers described him as someone who admired practicality over publicity. He was known for speaking directly, valuing hard work, and showing little patience for unnecessary attention. Those same qualities have often been used to describe James. Friends and commentators alike frequently portray him as reserved, respectful, and grounded. He has rarely sought headlines. He has rarely inserted himself into public controversies. Instead, he has maintained a reputation for quiet commitment, a trait that many now believe Philip found deeply reassuring. As conversations about the inheritance intensified, comparisons between the two became increasingly difficult to ignore. Some royal observers began pointing to similarities in temperament. Both appeared more comfortable focusing on responsibilities than recognition. Both seemed to prefer substance over spectacle. Both projected a sense of steadiness that can often be overlooked in an era dominated by constant public attention. While these observations remain speculative, they have fueled growing belief that Philip may have seen something of himself in James, a reflection of values he spent a lifetime trying to uphold. That possibility has transformed the inheritance debate. What initially appeared to be a surprising legal decision now seems far more understandable to those closest to the family. Reports suggest that some insiders were not shocked by the connection at all. In fact, they claim the choice makes perfect sense when viewed through the lens of trust rather than hierarchy. If Philip truly intended to preserve personal traditions, family history, and private values, then selecting someone he believed would respect those responsibilities may have felt entirely natural. Yet not everyone interprets the situation in the same way. As details continue to emerge and public curiosity grows stronger, the conversation has expanded beyond questions of inheritance and into broader discussions about legacy, symbolism, and the future direction of the royal family. What some view as a deeply personal expression of confidence, others see as a decision carrying wider implications. And those competing interpretations are beginning to create new questions just as the old ones seem closer to being answered. But while some saw the decision as a reflection of trust, others reportedly viewed it as the beginning of a new royal debate. Whenever inheritance enters royal life, emotions follow close behind. Not because of money alone, but because every decision carries a deeper message about loyalty, legacy, and who mattered most to those who came before. The moment whispers began spreading beyond private legal circles, the conversation surrounding Prince Philip's reported inheritance plans changed dramatically. What had started as a quiet discussion about sealed documents quickly evolved into something far larger. Suddenly, royal commentators, historians, and longtime observers found themselves debating not just what Prince Philip may have left behind, but what his decisions could mean. Because in royal life, inheritance is rarely viewed as a simple transfer of possessions. Every choice carries symbolism. Every decision invites interpretation. And every unexpected name raises questions that can echo through generations. Reports suggest reactions were deeply divided. Some observers viewed the alleged provisions connected to James, Earl of Wessex, as a powerful reflection of Prince Philip's independent character. Throughout his life, Philip earned a reputation for making up his own mind regardless of public expectations. He was not known for blindly following assumptions, nor was he particularly interested in satisfying outside opinion. To those who admired that quality, the possibility that he had chosen a less obvious path felt entirely consistent with the man they believed they understood. In their eyes, the inheritance was not surprising. It was simply another example of Philip refusing to let convention dictate his choices. Others, however, focused on a different question. Was this truly about financial value, or was it about something far more symbolic? The debate intensified almost immediately. Some argued that the true significance of the inheritance had little to do with material assets and everything to do with what the decision appeared to communicate. If Philip had indeed placed extraordinary confidence in James, what message was he sending about character, responsibility, and the future of the royal family? Was this an endorsement of quiet service over public prominence? A recognition of personal values rather than institutional rank? Or was there another layer to the story that remained hidden from view? As these questions multiplied, discussions became increasingly emotional. Royal inheritance has always carried a unique weight because it touches on deeply human concerns. Recognition, trust, legacy, the desire to know how one will be remembered. For some commentators, the reported arrangements seem to suggest that Prince Philip wanted future generations to understand that influence is not always measured by visibility, that sometimes the people who leave the deepest impression are those working quietly in the background rather than standing at the center of attention. At the same time, the situation placed James in an unexpectedly difficult position. Virtually overnight, a young royal who had spent much of his life outside the harsh glare of public scrutiny found himself at the center of intense curiosity. Every new rumor generated fresh headlines. Every discussion generated new theories. People who had rarely spoken about James suddenly found themselves analyzing his role, his personality, and his relationship with Prince Philip. The attention grew so quickly that some observers described it as one of the most surprising developments to emerge from the inheritance story. Meanwhile, speculation surrounding Philip's long-term intentions continued to escalate. Commentators revisited old interviews, family connections, and historical anecdotes, searching for clues that might explain his thinking. Some believed they were uncovering a carefully planned vision saint, retching back years. Others argued that too much was being read into incomplete information. Yet despite the growing noise, one group remained remarkably consistent in its response: palace officials. As public interest intensified and theories spread across media outlets, the institution itself maintained its familiar silence. No dramatic statements, no detailed explanations. No effort to publicly clarify the rumors, only restraint. And that silence may have fueled the mystery more than any revelation could, because every unanswered question seemed to generate three more. Every theory created another possibility. Every rumor pointed toward a larger story still waiting to be fully understood. The inheritance was no longer simply a matter of legal arrangements. It had become a puzzle about Prince Philip himself, his values, his priorities, and the legacy he hoped would survive him. As attention intensified, one final question remained unanswered, the very question that may explain everything. NG. Perhaps the inheritance was never simply about property. Perhaps it was never about wealth at all. Because those who knew Prince Philip best often describe a man obsessed not with possessions but with continuity. As the mystery surrounding the inheritance deepened, a growing number of royal observers began arriving at the same conclusion. They believed the story was being viewed through the wrong lens. The public conversation had become focused on assets, documents, and speculation about financial value. Yet those who spent years studying Prince Philip's life increasingly argued that money alone could never explain the decisions attributed to him. Throughout decades of service, Philip demonstrated a consistent belief that responsibility mattered more than privilege. Titles could be inherited, wealth could change hands, public attention could come and go. But duty, true duty, was something entirely different. It had to be earned, protected, and passed forward with care. That belief prepared to shape nearly every aspect of his life. For over 70 years, Philip carried out a role unlike any other in modern history. He stood beside a reigning monarch while accepting that the spotlight would never truly belong to him. He supported an institution larger than himself, often placing its needs ahead of personal recognition. Those experiences reportedly left a profound mark on how he viewed legacy. According to various accounts, he came to see stewardship as one of the most important responsibilities any individual could undertake. Not ownership, not control. Stewardship. The understanding that certain traditions, values, and responsibilities are merely borrowed from one generation before being entrusted to the next. Viewed through that perspective, the inheritance begins to take on a very different meaning. Reports suggest that Philip may have viewed parts of his personal legacy as something that required protection rather than possession. If true, then the question was, never who deserved a reward. The real question was who could be trusted to preserve what mattered most. Family traditions, personal history, principles developed over a lifetime of service. These are not things that can simply be stored away or measured by financial worth. They survive only when someone chooses to carry them forward. That possibility has fueled growing speculation that Philip's arrangements were carefully designed to safeguard continuity rather than create prestige. Insiders increasingly suggest that he may have been thinking about the future long after he was gone. Not merely the future of the monarchy itself, but the future of the values he believed should guide it. In that context, James, Earl of Wessex, begins to occupy a much more significant place within the story. Not because of rank, not because of publicity, but because he represents a younger generation standing at the threshold between inheritance and responsibility. For years, James remained largely outseen, the intense spotlight that followed senior royals. Yet some observers now argue that this very distance may have reinforced Philip's confidence in him. Reports suggest that the Duke admired individuals who focused on substance rather than attention, character rather than celebrity, commitment rather than visibility. Those who hold this view believe Philip saw qualities in James that reflected principles he spent a lifetime defending. Quiet determination, respect for tradition, a willingness to serve without demanding recognition. Whether these interpretations are accurate remains a matter of debate, but they have become central to understanding why the inheritance story continues to resonate so deeply. The more these ideas spread, the more the inheritance appears to symbolize something larger than a private family decision. It begins to look like part of a broader royal transition. One generation slowly passing responsibilities to another. One era drawing to a close while another premiere. Parades to begin. In that sense, the story is no longer only about Prince Philip. It is about what survives after him, what lessons endure, what values continue, and who will be entrusted with carrying those ideals into an uncertain future. That realization has transformed public perception of the entire controversy. What once seemed like a surprising inheritance now appears, to many, like a carefully considered statement about continuity, trust, and the future of a family navigating profound change. Yet for all the speculation, one reality remains impossible to ignore. If these interpretations are correct, then James may have inherited far more than possessions. He may have inherited expectations, responsibilities, and a legacy that will follow him for years to come. And that transition would place James in a position he may never have anticipated. For years, James, Earl of Wessex, lived largely outside the relentless spotlight that follows senior royals. Yet overnight, that quiet exists. Appeared to change. Suddenly, people wanted answers. They wanted meaning. They wanted to understand what Prince Philip had seen. In many ways, this may have been the most unexpected consequence of the entire inheritance story. For years, James had occupied a rare position within the royal family. He was known, certainly, but not constantly analyzed. Recognized, but not relentlessly scrutinized. While other members of the monarchy found themselves at the center of headlines, speculation, and public controversy, James largely remained removed from that cycle. His life unfolded with a degree of privacy that few royals of his generation could truly claim. Yet as reports surrounding Prince Philip's alleged inheritance plans continued to spread, that privacy began slipping away. Almost overnight, the questions multiplied. Who was James? Why had Philip reportedly placed such confidence in him? And what did this sudden attention mean for his future? The curiosity was immediate and intense. Royal commentators who had rarely discussed James in depth suddenly dedicated entire segments to analyzing his role within the family. Articles revisited his upbringing, his character, and the quiet path he had followed while growing up within one of the world's most famous institutions. Observers searched for clues hidden within years of seemingly ordinary moments. Every interaction with Prince Philip gained new significance. Every family connection was re-examined. It was as though the public had discovered a chapter of the royal story they had previously overlooked, and now they wanted to understand every detail. Yet with that attention came something far more complicated: expectation. Because inheritance within a royal context rarely remains a private matter. Whether justified or not, people often attach meaning to it. They look for messages. They search for symbols. And in this case, many began treating James not merely as a beneficiary of Philip's confidence, but as a representative, type of something larger. Some saw him as a bridge between generations. Others viewed him as a reflection of values Prince Philip considered worth preserving. Fair or unfair, those interpretations created a burden that few young people would willingly choose. That burden becomes even more significant when viewed through the lens of Philip's extraordinary legacy. The Duke of Edinburgh spent decades establishing a reputation defined by discipline, resilience, and unwavering service. Any individual associated with that legacy inevitably faces comparison. And comparisons can be difficult. They create expectations that are often impossible to satisfy. Reports suggest that despite growing public fascination, James has remained focused on the priorities that shaped his life before the inheritance story emerged: education, personal development, preparing for the future. Those closest to him reportedly described someone determined not to be consumed by speculation or distracted by the noise surrounding his name. Still, the contrast between public perception and private reality remains striking. Outside observers often view royal life through the lens of symbolism and historical significance. Family members, however, must navigate those expectations while living ordinary human experiences. For James, that means balancing personal ambitions with a legacy he never asked to become responsible for. It means understanding that every decision may now be interpreted through the framework of Prince Philip's reported confidence in him. It means recognizing that public curiosity is unlikely to disappear anytime soon. Perhaps that is the most fascinating aspect of the entire story. The inheritance itself may eventually fade from headlines. Legal questions may be resolved. Speculation may lose momentum. But the larger question will remain: how will James define his own path? Will he embrace the expectations attached to his name, or carve out a direction entirely his own? Can he honor the values many believe Philip admired while still building an identity separate from the comparisons that now surround him? Those questions have no immediate answers. They belong to the future. And perhaps that is exactly why this story continues to resonate. Because beneath the rumors, debates, and speculation lies something deeply human: the challenge of carrying forward a legacy while discovering who you are. For James, that challenge may only be beginning. The inheritance may have brought attention, responsibility, and endless discussion, but it also opened a new chapter, one that remains unwritten, uncertain, and filled with possibilities that neither lawyers nor commentators can fully predict. But the final chapter of this story is not about inheritance, it is about the enduring power of legacy itself. In the end, the most powerful royal stories are rarely about crowns, castles, or fortunes. They are about the invisible threads connecting one generation to the next. And few figures understood that better than Prince Philip. As the speculation surrounding James, Earl of Wessex, and Prince Philip's reported inheritance slowly began to settle, a different picture started to emerge. It was a picture far bigger than legal documents, family discussions, or questions of ownership. At its heart stood a man whose influence stretched across generations of royal history. For more than 7 decades, Prince Philip served as one of the monarchy's most enduring figures. Through moments of triumph and periods of uncertainty, he remained a constant presence beside the crown. His role was rarely simple. His path was often demanding. Yet throughout changing eras, shifting public expectations, and countless challenges, he built a reputation founded on resilience, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to duty. That commitment may ultimately explain why this story continues to resonate so deeply. Because when people discuss Prince Philip's legacy, they are not merely discussing what he owned. They are discussing what he represented. Throughout his life, he consistently emphasized service over status, responsibility over recognition, and purpose over personal comfort. Those principles became woven into the fabric of his public identity. Even now, years after his passing, they continue to shape how many people interpret the decisions he may have left behind. Reports suggest that if James was indeed entrusted with an important part of Philip's personal legacy, the significance lies not in material value but in symbolic meaning. The inheritance has become a reflection of something much larger than possessions. It has become part of an ongoing royal narrative about continuity, about trust, about the belief that every generation has a responsibility to preserve certain values before passing them forward. In that sense, James's role is no longer viewed simply through the lens of inheritance. Instead, it is increasingly seen as part of a broader story about succession, not of titles, but of principles. The more observers examined Philip's life, the clearer this interpretation appeared to become. Again and again, discussions returned to the same themes: duty, resilience, continuity. These were qualities that defined much of Philip's journey. They were qualities tested repeatedly throughout decades of public service. And according to those who knew him best, they were qualities he deeply respected in others. It is therefore unsurprising that many commentators now believe the inheritance debate was never really about choosing a recipient. It was about identifying someone capable of carrying forward values that mattered deeply to him. At the same time, the royal family continues navigating a period of profound change. New generations are stepping into greater prominence. Long-standing traditions are adapting to modern realities. Public expectations continue evolving. Yet amid all those transformations, the institution remains anchored by a belief in continuity. That balance between change and tradition has always been one of the monarchy's greatest challenges. It is also one of its greatest strengths. And stories like this remind people that behind every public role stands a network of personal relationships, private lessons, and inherited responsibilities stretching across decades. Perhaps that is why public fascination has endured. People are not captivated merely by the possibility of an inheritance. They are captivated by what it appears to represent. The idea that one generation can quietly shape the next. The possibility that values can survive long after those who first championed them are gone. The belief that influence is measured not only by public achievements but also by the principles left behind for others to follow. And in that respect, Prince Philip's presence remains remarkably powerful. Though he is no longer here to explain his intentions, debate his choices, or clarify the meaning behind his decisions, his influence continues to ripple through the royal family. It can be found in traditions still observed, responsibilities still honored, and lessons still remembered. The inheritance story may eventually fade from headlines, but the larger questions it raised will remain. Questions about character, about stewardship, about what truly matters when a lifetime of service comes to an end. Because perhaps the most enduring lesson of all is that legacies are not preserved through possessions alone. They survive through people, through actions, through values carried forward by those willing to embrace them. And whether or not every rumor surrounding the inheritance proves accurate, the discussion has revealed something undeniable. Prince Philip's influence did not end with his passing. In many ways, it continues to shape the future of the monarchy even now. Because while estates can be inherited and possessions can change hands, the greatest legacy Prince Philip may have left behind was the belief that duty endures long after those who carry it are gone. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.